I'm Catherine, and I'm the Sustainable Tourism Officer and Lead Officer for the Limits of Acceptable Change project for the Norfolk Coast Protected Landscape. The Norfolk Coast, as I'm sure many of you know, is a place of extraordinary beauty, but it's also a place of increasing pressure. So today I'll introduce a framework that helps us protect it while keeping it accessible. The Limits of Acceptable Change project isn't about saying no to visitors, it's about saying yes to the sustainable management of the coast. So I'll just quickly explain who the Protected Landscape is, just in case you're not aware. So we're not just one organisation, we're a network of partnerships working together across land, sea and trail. So the Norfolk Coast Partnership manages the Norfolk Coast National Landscape, which is in green on the map you can see. The Wash and North Norfolk Marine Partnership manages the Wash and North Norfolk Marine Protected Area Network, which is the blue on the map. And we also have the Norfolk National Trails Partnership, which manages the Headers Way and Norfolk Coast Path National Trail, which is the dotted line that kind of runs through everything. Each partnership brings a unique expertise from marine conservation to trail management, and it creates a holistic approach to stewardship of our protected landscape. So what is the LAC? Limits of Acceptable Change is, which I'll also describe as the LAC, sorry. So think of it as a balancing act between welcoming visitors and preserving the very landscapes that they come to enjoy. It's not about restricting access, it's about enhancing it responsibly with measurable goals for both nature and people. An example of this could be increasing the accessibility, longevity and quality of public footpaths to reduce erosion, to protect habitats and enhance the visitor experience. We have three main aims for the Limits of Acceptable Change project, and they're to achieve sustainable management of visitor access along the coast, to encourage dispersal rather than displacement, meaning encouraging visitors to places that can handle additional visitor pressure rather than those that can't. And also we aim to create spaces where both wildlife and people can thrive. So that means that the framework is particularly appropriate for a heavily protected landscape like the Norfolk Coast Protected Landscape. So I'm just going to quickly talk you through the process now. The LAC process is made up of 9 stages and each one plays a vital role. We start by identifying what we want to protect. So that could be a habitat, a trail, a wildlife reserve, or a community space. We then define what acceptable change looks like. So that could be a certain level of footpath erosion or a threshold for wildlife disturbance. It's not about perfection, it's about knowing when to act. So we then select indicators, which are things that we can track over time. These might be physical, like vegetation loss, or social, like visitor satisfaction. And these indicators help us understand whether conditions are improving or declining. Before we can manage change, we need to know where we're starting from, and that means collecting data through surveys, mapping, and local knowledge to build a clear picture of the current state of the landscape. Now we define the thresholds. How much erosion is too much? How many visitors are too many? These standards are tailored to each zone and help us make informed decisions. We look at alternative ways to allocate space. What if we moved more visitors to robust areas and protected sensitive ones? This step helps us weigh the pros and cons of different approaches. Once we've chosen a zoning strategy, we decide what needs to happen. So that could be signage or improving footpaths or introducing seasonal restrictions. We evaluate all the options and select the one that best balances access and protection. This is done collaboratively with our stakeholders and land managers. And finally, we implement the plan to monitor how things evolve. If conditions change, we try to adapt, and that's the beauty of the LAC. It's flexible, responsive, and rooted in real-world feedback. It's important to remember that different activities have different impacts, A dog walk isn't the same as a drone flight, and our framework tries to reflect that. It's a dynamic process, not a static rulebook, and that's what makes it powerful. It evolves with the landscape and the people who use it. So now I've gone through that quickly, I'll just talk a little bit about why the LAC is important. So I'll talk a little bit about the numbers first. In 2023, my figures are a little bit more out of date than Pete's. Overnight trips to Norfolk rose by 9%, which equates to about 250,000 more people walking trails, visiting beaches, and exploring sensitive habitats. It's not just people, it's pets and other forms of recreation too. So dog ownership in the UK jumped from 23% in 2014 to 28% in 2024, which is about 340,000 new dog owners, and presumably lots more dogs. But alongside dogs, use of jet skis, drones, mountain bikes, and horse riding in sensitive areas is having a really big impact. Each of these activities brings its own kind of disturbance. Whether it's noise, speed, or physical presence, all can have an impact on wildlife, especially in sensitive landscapes. And these figures aren't just statistics, they tell us that visitor pressure is growing and our management strategies need to grow with it. Let me share a quick story from a sensitive site on the Norfolk coast. On a sunny weekend in the summer, volunteers noticed a spike in visitors, many with dogs off lead. Despite signage and cordons, several people wandered into nesting zones. The result? Disturbed birds, abandoned nests, and lots of frustration for conservation teams. This isn't a one-off, it's a pattern that we're seeing more often. The LAC framework helps us move from reactive measures, like temporary signs, to proactive, site-specific standards. Imagine if every visitor knew exactly where they could go and why it mattered. And that's the kind of change that we're working towards. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about the benefits of the LAC framework. So I'll start by talking about the natural world, which is really the star of the Norfolk coast. Vegetation and soil benefit when we limit foot traffic and infrastructure. It's about keeping the ground beneath our feet healthy and resilient. Wildlife habitats protected from disturbance, especially during critical times like nesting or migration. The LAC helps us draw invisible lines that say this space needs quiet. Biodiversity thrives when we identify pressures and act early. Whether it's noise, dogs off lead, or overcrowding, the LAC helps us respond before damage is done. Water quality and wetlands are safeguarded by managing runoff, pollution, and visitor access. These ecosystems are fragile and vital. And finally, ecosystem processes, the behind-the-scenes magic of nature, are supported through adaptive management. It's about letting nature do what it does best with minimal interference. Imagine the coast not as just a place to visit, but as a living system. Every decision we make affects its ability to regenerate, to host wildlife, and to inspire future generations. Now let's shift our focus to people, because the LAC framework isn't just about protecting landscapes, it's about supporting communities and livelihoods. For environmental groups, the LAC offers a practical way to set boundaries and protect biodiversity. It's like giving nature a seat at the decision-making table. Local communities benefit too by managing visitor pressure in a way that protects quality of life. We help preserve cultural heritage and support sustainable economic opportunities. For the tourism sector, it's a win-win. Visitors get better experiences and businesses thrive in destinations that are well managed and respected. Farmers and landowners gain flexibility. The LAC helps us balance conservation with opportunity, allowing land to be used wisely without compromising its future. Policymakers and planners get a toolkit for smarter decisions, whether it's infrastructure, tourism development, or heritage protection. The LAC supports evidence-based planning. And for researchers, it's a goldmine. The framework provides a structured way to study human impact, resilience, and how communities adapt to change. I'm now just going to talk you through how we've used the framework in the protected landscape. So phase one of the framework really laid the groundwork. Data, workshops, and collaborations shaped our understanding of the landscape for future management. We didn't just study the coast, we listened to it and to the people who know it best. So phase 1 started in 2022 and the focus was to provide recommendations for future sustainable development and tourism around the Wash and Norfolk coast. Workshops were a key element, and the first one focused on stages 1 to 3 in the process, identifying the area for research, defining zones, and deciding indicators and standards with our stakeholders. The second workshop, held 5 months later, after more data collection and the first draft of the report had been shared with our stakeholders, we looked at stages 6 to 8 of the process, identifying alternative zones, management actions, and starting to put an action plan together. We ended the phase with defined zones, management actions, and monitoring standards, as well as next steps. So now let's have a look at how we've zoned the Norfolk coast based on our stakeholder aspirations. So we identified 6 distinct zones, which you can see in the bottom right there, from town and village to wildlife-only areas. Each zone has its own set of indicators and standards. For example, destination sites might support higher visitor numbers with robust infrastructure, while wildlife-only zones prioritise habitat protection and minimal human access. This zoning helps us guide visitors to areas that can handle the pressure, while safeguarding more sensitive locations. It's not about exclusion, it's about smart, informed access that benefits both people and nature. As you can see on the map, which is an example from our phase 1 report, much of the Wash on the far left-hand side is marked as wildlife only. It's because much of this area is mudflats, sandflats and salt marsh and not easily accessible to the public. It's also incredibly sensitive and important land for our wildlife. As we move eastwards towards Hunstanton, you can see more destination sites and wildlife tourism areas. These are zones that we would like to encourage visitors to, as they are able to handle the additional visitor pressure. It's important to remember that these maps are aspirational and that it's not what's there right now. We and our stakeholders had to be realistic when creating these maps and not mark the whole area as wildlife only, as much as we might have liked to. So in phase 1, we covered steps 1 to 8, building a strong foundation, and implementation comes next, but only after careful planning. So in phase 2, we refined our approach and focused on a case study site in Home, a site with real challenges and real potential, which lies just east of Hunstanton. Consistency and collaboration were key, and every step involved stakeholders and land managers. We started phase 2 in 2024 and we ended in the summer this year, so we've only just finished. The focus was to identify if there was merit in simplifying or refining the original standards to create a case study site that would benefit from engagement in the LAC process. The work carried out included additional surveys and computer-based work, replicating the methods from phase 1, with workshops being a key element. This time the workshops were held after all of the data collection was complete, so we had a much better idea of the issues and opportunities of the area. The first workshop focused on simplifying and refining the standards identified in phase 1, and you have to remember that 2 years had actually passed since we received the phase 1 report, and the landscapes and opinions changed a lot in that time. The second workshop focused on our Home case study, identifying standards, actions and alternative sites in the area, as well as looking at best practice examples from other areas. And we ended the phase with refined zones, further management actions and monitoring standards, as well as Home-specific research, recommendations and management actions. We're now ready to move from planning and into action. So phase 2 also involves stages 1 to 8, and we've started to look into implementation. So before I finish, I'll just talk a little bit about our case study site at Home. So this area is home to ground nesting birds, which are particularly vulnerable to disturbance. Despite existing measures like cordons and volunteer patrols, we've seen consistent disruption on this site. Visitors often unintentionally stray into sensitive zones, especially during peak seasons. In particular, dogs off lead have been a major issue, which is something we've seen an increase in post-COVID. The landowners, Lestrange Estate and Norfolk Wildlife Trust, recognised that a collaborative approach was needed, and that's where the LAC framework came in. By applying the LAC, We're not just reacting to problems, we're proactively setting standards and thresholds for acceptable change, tailored to this specific site. The Phase 2 report includes targeted management recommendations, and Home is now moving towards implementation. Looking ahead, our next steps are also focused on implementation, starting with Home and expanding across the coast. We aim to continue research, refining indicators, and working with stakeholders to ensure consistency. Imagine a future where every visitor to the Norfolk coast understands where they can go, what they can do, and why it matters. Consistent signage, clear messaging, and collaborative management will help us to create a coast that's welcoming, resilient, and ecologically sound. The photo on the screen now shows an example of some innovative and fresh signage recently installed on the Norfolk Coast Path by our Norfolk National Trails team. It makes me really excited to see the tactile, fluid, and bold elements that could show what we could do with the project in the future. Ultimately, the LAC framework gives us a roadmap, not just for managing pressure, but for enhancing the experience for everyone involved. And we're working towards a coast that is not just visited, but valued. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions, then I'm happy to stay. And we also have a stall over there. So
Thank you, Kat. That was fantastic.